Hello, greetings to you. Welcome, thank you for being here. This is going to be a tarot reading for the collective. I'm recording this on the autumn equinox 2020, and this is going to be sort of centered around what do we need to know at this time. But if you happen to find this later, please know that this message is evergreen and you'll find it when you need it. So even if it's after the equinox, even if it's a year from now, 6 months from now, 5 years from now, I hope that you will find something that resonates for you whenever you come across this message. If you are here, you probably already know who I am, but just in case, my name is Carrie Mallon. I am a professional tarot reader. I am the co-creator of the Spacious Tarot, which is the deck I'm going to use for the reading today. And yeah, I'm happy to have you here. As we are beginning, I think it's always nice to start by asking yourself what you can do to get even just a little more comfortable right now. When I'm listening to readings or podcasts or things like that, it's often while I'm going for a walk or cooking dinner or like putting away laundry or something like that. So even if you're doing a task while you listen to this, is there something you can do that will just make you a little more cozy? Like maybe even doing a couple of shoulder rolls or taking a couple of deep breaths, but just anything you can do to help you come into your center and connect. And maybe even, put out an intention if that speaks to you, to the universe, to your higher self, whatever works for your belief system, but putting out an intention that you can receive the messages that you most need from this reading. And I always say this to my clients, and this really applies, of course, even more in a collective reading like this, but take what resonates with you and leave the rest behind. If you are in an ideal situation, or I guess I shouldn't say ideal, but if you're in a situation where you're not doing another task while you listen to this, it's also really nice to have a cup of tea. I am going to be drinking tea as I'm recording the reading. I have a tea from Metolius Tea Company, and it's an herbal tea. It's a blend of coconut, cardamom, cinnamon, ginger, licorice, and pink peppercorns, and it is delightful and it feels really appropriate for the fall equinox. It's, the cinnamon vibes and the peppercorn vibes, they kind of have that autumnal feel to them. I also want to talk for a moment about the spread I'm going to be using today. So there was this amazing kind of combination journal and day planner called The Sacred Journey that I used for, I want to say like probably 3, maybe 4 years before the creator stopped producing it. And I loved it so much. It was amazing. It had card spreads that you could use with tarot or oracle or whatever you want throughout the book. And for every solstice and equinox, the creator of The Sacred Journey suggested you use this spread that I'm going to be sharing with you today. It's called the Spiral Journey spread, and it's very simple but very powerful and very effective. So I'll talk about the spread positions as we go through it, but I just wanted to give credit. That's where the spread comes from. I love this spread. I try to use it for myself every solstice and every equinox. Okay, I think that's about all of my sort of preemptive rambling before we go ahead and get right into it. I think I mentioned this already, but I will be using the Spacious Tarot for the reading. When I put this up, I will probably put it on YouTube, and I'll try to put a picture of the spread on the video so that if you'd like, you can look at that and follow along. I already gave the cards a thorough shuffling before starting the recording, but I'm going to take a moment to do one more shuffle and then we will get going. Okay, as I lay out the cards, I will tell you what the positions are within the spread. So the very first card, this is the center of our spiral, is Essence. And we have the Ace of Swords, The next card position is past, and we have judgment. Present is the Four of Swords. Future is the Child of Swords. Oh my gosh, so many swords cards. Possibility is the Hierophant. Blessing is the Eight of Pentacles. And synthesis is the Ace of Pentacles. A few things stand out to me looking at the overall scope of the spread. The first, of course, is that we have all these swords cards here, especially at the beginning of the spread. It also stands out to me that we have two aces. We have the Ace of Swords and the Ace of Pentacles, and they're almost creating like a bookend for us because the Ace of Swords came up as our first card and the Ace of Pentacles came up as our last card. Sometimes when I look at a certain card or when I look at a spread as a whole, there will be a word or a phrase that just sort of comes up for me. And with this entire spread, the word recalibration is coming to me pretty strongly. It feels like we're going into this phase collectively of realizing, and this is partly based on the cards, but I'm also just sort of talking about my thoughts based on my own experience and my own observations of where I am individually and again where we are maybe collectively. But 2020, if you are listening to this as I'm putting it live, has been a challenging year for everyone. I think it's safe to say that there's not anybody I know, there's not anybody I've talked to this year who hasn't had a pretty high level of stress and discomfort going on. And so with these two aces in particular, what it feels like to me is we're in this place where we need to recalibrate because we're sort of realizing, both with our individual stories as well as our collective journey, that this is going to be going on for a while. It's not like we're going to immediately be moving into a phase where all of the issues and tensions that we've been experiencing are resolved. So what the aces kind of feel like they're asking us and inviting us to do is recalibrate our approach so that our approach is really effective and really useful. Now that I said that, I think those two words seem really important here as well. Useful is a word that I think resonates with the Ace of Swords, and effective, I would say, resonates with the Ace of Pentacles. So we're kind of in this place of recalibrating, and with the aces as well, because there's such a fresh energy here, I think it almost feels in a way like kind of giving ourselves permission to let go of some of the old methods that we'd been trying on and say, okay, we've probably even already been in this process of shedding. Like I know I personally have been doing a lot of letting go and a lot of shedding throughout all of 2020. So now it's time to sort of say, okay, I've done the letting go, so how can I now begin to bring in this new approach and focusing on approaches that are useful and effective. That those words now keep resonating to me, and it seems like that can be questions that we can ask ourselves collectively and individually as we start trying these new modalities and trying these new approaches, just constantly watching them unfold and asking ourselves, is this effective and is this useful? Let's hone in more on the Ace of Swords in particular. The position for this card is Essence. I love having an ace come up as the essence, and I especially love that it's the Ace of Swords. Something that I think about sometimes with the Ace of Swords is paring away our thoughts, especially paring away the thoughts that are actually not really doing anything useful. There's that word again. There's a simplicity in the Ace of Swords. There is an essence in the Ace of Swords. So this essential question with the Ace of Swords again is, what thoughts are useful? We sometimes can get a bit on autopilot, and we see this in some of the other swords cards that are the ones people sometimes feel a little squeamish about, like the Nine of Swords or the Ten of Swords or even like the Eight of Swords. Those are cards that one of the reasons they make us feel squeamish is because they do show us the ways that our own thoughts can imprison us, can take us off track, can cause anguish, and can be quite destructive, frankly. So with the Ace of Swords, there's an opportunity to clear all of that gunk away, to clear away the thoughts that are only causing harm or chaos or confusion, and ask what is essential, what is useful. One more, I think, tangible way we can bring in the essence of this card is to place our focus going forward on the question, what do I know? What am I certain of? Because sometimes we can get really hung up on all of the unanswerable questions, and it's not that it's not important to have space to explore those, but sometimes we need to focus on what we do know, what we are certain of, what is actually effective. This makes sense to me in a way because I consider myself like a perpetual newbie at astrology. I'm always kind of joking about that, but also serious. Like, I feel like I'm always trying to study and learn about astrology, but it's like I never quite feel like I really grasped it. But we are entering Libra season if you're listening to this as I'm putting it out. And one of the things that I understand about Libra energy is Libra energy wants to have some sort of sense of harmony, some sort of sense of balance, and some sense of like an answer. So, and I also understand that, Libra energy can be a little bit indecisive because there's this fixation on wanting to come to the right answer. So the Ace of Swords is sort of like, how can we simplify that process a little bit and just kind of focus on, okay, here are the things we can answer with certainty. Again, there might be many things that we cannot answer with certainty right now, and that's okay. But it can be so empowering to step into, this is what I do know. It reminds me, I am, like many people are, a fan of Oprah, and I have this little book that Oprah wrote called What I Know for Sure. And that's something she talks about a lot, this is what I know for sure. So that energy of this is what I know for sure, it feels like that's one of the core essences here of the Ace of Swords that we're being asked to embrace at this equinox. What do you know for sure? Ask yourself that today, and ask yourself that throughout this coming season, and see what comes up for you. We have Judgment in the position for the past. This one is particularly fascinating to me. What comes to my mind with this one is the notion that we're already in the new world. We're already in a new reality. Judgment is it can be an ushering in of a new way of being, an ushering in of stepping into our higher purpose. So this card coming up in the past, I think, is letting us know whether we like it or not, and whether we've fully accepted it or not, we're in a new energy. We're in a new phase, individually and collectively. Something that's coming to me very strongly for this one is that for some of us, there might still be some resistance to this. There might still be this feeling of, oh no, I'm not, the new reality isn't quite here yet. I'm not quite in it. And for some of us, it's because it's sort of scary to feel like, no, this is really the moment to step into your highest self. Some of us might still have some attachments to like excuses or old patterns or old realities. So even if, we haven't yet quite accepted and said, okay, yeah, this is a new energy. This is a new fucking chapter. This card is letting us know, well, it is, it is whether you like it or not. You can resist that energy. You can deny that energy. You can feel uncomfortable in that energy, but it's there, whether you sort of accept it or not. So for some of us, we might still have to do some work around saying, okay, this is a new reality. It really, really is. There might still be some fragments of the old reality that are trying to hold on, but how can I come into an acceptance of this new reality? And the other thing with judgment is it's a card of, again, like I kind of already mentioned this, but for me, I think about judgment as a card of a higher purpose. So instead of, if there's still narratives hanging around for you of, oh, the new reality is just chaos and it's scary and it's whatever, judgment is asking you, how can you shift that perspective into, oh, this new reality is actually one in which we are all being called to be the most integrity-filled version of ourselves, to be in constant sort of seeking and attunement to a sense of purpose and a sense of living with meaning, because that can also help if you are by chance still experiencing some resistance or denial of the new reality. It can help to remind yourself, the new reality, it isn't just something that's scary, it's something that's beautiful. And it's, if you can think of it as something that's filled with purpose for you individually as well as all of us collectively, that can be a more useful and effective, going back to those words, way to process things. We have the Four of Swords coming up to talk about the present. And this is perhaps one of the reasons that word recalibration felt so strong that I mentioned earlier. The Four of Swords is a card of recalibration. The fours have this sense of stability. Like I always talk about, the Emperor is card 4. 4 is, like a table has 4 legs. So there's this sense of structure and solidity with the fours. So we have the Four of Swords, which is the mental realm. So this, in our present moment, is giving us a chance to restabilize and recalibrate our mental energy, really. It's kind of funny because right before I started recording this, so I mentioned at the beginning this tea that I'm drinking, the Metolius North is what the blend is called. And I went onto the website for this tea company right before I started this recording, and I was reading about this tea. And one of the things they say that this tea is good for is toning down energy bonking, bonking, energy bonking. And it just made me laugh because doesn't it really feel like all of our energy has been bonking for basically all of 2020. 2020 is just the year of energy bonking. So the Four of Swords feels like it ties into that. It's like the Four of Swords is an opportunity in this present moment to do whatever works for you to tone down energy bonking. Something that feels particularly important to mention about this Four of Swords is it's, again, swords are the suit of the mental realm. So it might not be a present moment where it feels like externally things are toning down. There's probably still a lot of stress and upset and, things like that going on, again, collectively and personally. But there's a chance here to sort of recalibrate our narrative again with the mental realm. That feels to me more like what we're seeing with the Four of Swords, rather than, life saying, okay, I'm going to give you a break. It's more like we're changing our narrative about how we process all of the things that are going on within us and around us. This seems so important because, again, these are things I've already talked about to some degree, but judgment talks about, yes, we're already in this new reality, but the aces are kind of like we're still just in this initial phase of figuring out how to approach this new reality. And the Four of Swords is here saying, and we need to make sure that we have sustainability for this, because there is still going to continue to be some trial and error. And it reminds me of I think this is something I talk about a lot with more of the difficult swords cards when they come up in readings with my clients. But there's a quote I really like that says, "There will always be suffering, but we don't have to suffer over the suffering." And for me, suffering over suffering is a metaphor for when the narratives and the thought processes and the stories that we have about situations amplify the difficulty and amplify the stress. So again, the Four of Swords isn't saying this is a present moment where there is no stress, but the Four of Swords is saying how can we create and welcome in a present moment where we are not suffering over the suffering, where we are recalibrating our mental energy so that we can still see things for what they are, but give ourselves a chance to come back to center so that we can actually process that from a collected and even intentional state of mind. This all just flows perfectly into the Child of Swords, which is in the position to give us some messages about the future. I don't read predictively, so when I think about positions that talk about the future, I often think of them in one of two ways. One is sometimes, it can sort of be like a weather forecast, sort of here's some things that might be on the horizon. Or another thing I often think about with the future position is just advice of like what energy we should bring in or what energy we can like consciously choose to create as the future, if that makes sense. Even just in a visual sense, in this deck, there is a tie-in between the Child of Swords and the Ace of Swords. You'll notice if you look at the imagery that this sword itself looks quite similar between the two cards. So some of those themes we talked about in the Ace of Swords of asking yourself that question of what do I know for sure? I think those themes are continued and echoed and even have sort of like an exclamation mark, we could say, put on them here in the Child of Swords. But there's also this interesting paradox that I see with the Child of Swords because there's still that important question of what do I know for sure? But the child is the equivalent to what most decks would call the page. And when I think about the child, I think of them as just starting out, and sometimes they can be a bit naive in their approach. So there's also the paradox is asking yourself what you know for sure, but not becoming too attached to that. So kind of wearing your certainty lightly, I think, is something that the Child of Swords asks us to do. The Child of Swords is the part of you that is capable of being very dearly and very sort of devotionally in touch with what you know is true. But it's also the part of you that's completely open to the way that might shift and move both with time, with maturity, and with new information. So that feels really important, that question of what do I know for sure is not something that we're coming at right now from a place of like, I'm right and you're wrong. It's something that we're coming at out of an interest in what is true and a respect for the fact that sometimes new information becomes available, or sometimes our thinking evolves, right? It's not having a sense of attachment. The child is not attached. The child is not clinging. That's more of like the explorer is in our deck, what we call the knight. That's more of kind of like an explorer or knight type of energy, is being a little more stubborn. The child is open. Even in our card, we have these little sort of wind, the air is moving. The air is not stagnant in the Child of Swords. So we need to be able to be present with things as they change and let our knowledge evolve. Let our thinking evolve. Imagine that. Imagine if all of us collectively on this planet were willing to let our thinking evolve. How much of a difference that would make. Part of the reason that I'm talking about these things I'm talking about with the Child of Swords is, everything sort of connects to everything else within a reading. And we have the Hierophant here, which is in the position of possibility. Possibility. I love that. And that's a perfect tie-in to the Hierophant, to what we were just talking about with the Child of Swords, because one of the central themes of the Hierophant is belief systems. And thinking about this, this card that's talking about belief systems and the way that it's coming up in this field of possibility is just so wonderful to me. This is something I talk about a lot with the Hierophant in my blog and also in the guidebook for the Spacious Tarot, because it's something that's important to me personally, but it's the idea of resisting dogma. Sometimes the Hierophant, one of the sort of shadowy things about this card, especially in other decks, is there can be a bit of a sense of dogma in the Hierophant. The Hierophant can be linked to traditional religious systems in which there is an external person or an external source that sort of gives you the answers and you kind of just have to fall in line with those. But there's also this possibility with the Hierophant of taking a less dogmatic approach and not being, again, like we talked about with the Child of Swords, not being attached to our belief systems, not being, not kind of fighting to the death for what we know is true, but to sort of have room for ourselves to explore what we know to be true and what we believe to be true, and to know that there is always room for that to be lovingly challenged, both by other people as well as by ourselves, as we change, as we learn, as we, gain experience in life. I think a lot of this might also tie back into judgment, being in the past position, because again, there's this idea that we are in a new reality. If we like it or if we don't like it, we're here. And sometimes in a new reality, we have to ask what beliefs are still a fit, what beliefs still make sense, what beliefs still resonate, and do we need to, have room to adjust the belief systems, the ideas, the truths that we've been carrying that worked in the old reality, but maybe they no longer work in the new reality. And at the same time, what beliefs are even more true now, because that's a sense I get looking at the spread as a whole, is there might be, for a lot of us, there might be things that we've always believed on some level, but maybe we never really let ourselves take full ownership of those beliefs, or we thought like, oh, that's a silly thing, or that's a naive thing, or that's whatever. So it's sort of those two questions of what beliefs cannot come forward, what beliefs need to be held lightly and maybe even released, but also what beliefs feel even more prominent now, what beliefs feel even more true now. So those are some questions that might be really powerful to sit with. We have the Eight of Pentacles in the position for blessing. And I feel this tie-in between the Eight of Pentacles and the Four of Swords, that it would be easy to see a dichotomy or sort of like a difference between these cards, because generally, the Four of Swords, we talked about coming back to center, and there can even be this idea of rest in the Four of Swords, whereas with the Eight of Pentacles, we often think of this card as being about doing and engaging. But I feel they tie in together within this spread, because the Eight of Pentacles as a blessing feels like it's giving us permission right now to not feel like you have to do everything, and to not feel that you have to do all of the things you used to do in the old reality. This can be a tricky one, because for most of us, to some degree, there are things that we obviously have to do because we exist within, a capitalistic system, and we have to pay our bills and we have to whatever, we have to do these things to keep our income flowing and all of that. So I'm not trying to say this as, just let go of like the obligations that you have to work or whatever. But there is a bit of a paradox in the Eight of Pentacles as a blessing, in terms of, I do feel like it's giving you permission to say, you know what, I don't need to be so hard on myself if I don't get every single freaking thing on my to-do list done. Because for a lot of people right now, the to-do list in 2020 has just become absolutely unmanageable. Because, some people are trying to work while also trying to facilitate schooling for their kids, and, also trying to do all of the things. We were already trying to do all of the things before 2020, and now it just became absolutely, to a degree that for a lot of people it's just truly not sustainable. So there is kind of this question in the Eight of Pentacles of like, can I give myself the blessing of taking some pressure off certain tasks, and just kind of accepting that if I don't get everything done, it's not a personal failing. It's just, there's a certain amount of time, there's a certain amount of energy that you have, and that's really that. You can't ask yourself to do too much or to do everything. This might be, for some of you, connected to that idea of like reevaluating belief systems, because there is sort of a cultural thing for a lot of us where there's sort of this belief, even on like a really deep sort of unconscious level, that your worth as a human being is linked to your productivity or your output. So this might tie back into that Hierophant and some of these other cards of like, how can you as an individual and we as a collective keep questioning that particular story, that particular belief, and say, no, actually our worth is inherent and can never be changed or devalued based on anything external. It doesn't matter how quote unquote productive I am, or how many things I get done on my to-do list today. Like, I always have this inherent worth as a human being. So that feels like another blessing with the Eight of Pentacles as well, is just really realigning yourself with your inherent worth and knowing that that is there no matter what. And I think one more thing I want to say on the Eight of Pentacles as a blessing, and I hope this doesn't sound like completely counterintuitive to everything else I just said, but there also seems like part of the blessing with this card is just asking yourself, what is the most important thing to me right now? And going very deep with that question, kind of going back to judgment and knowing this isn't about what was important in the old reality. It's about what's important to me now in the new reality. Has that answer changed? And the Eight of Pentacles as a blessing can also be reminding you to take the limited time and the limited energy you have, and as much as it is within your power, focus the time and energy that you have on what actually matters to you. So often we give our time, our power, our energy to things that are just like don't matter to us. And I know, again, sometimes it's because that's like what we have to do to get by. But where you have the autonomy, I think there is this blessing in the Eight of Pentacles to say, how can I give more of my power and my time to what actually really truly does mean something to me? We have the Ace of Pentacles as synthesis, and we already talked about this card when we started talking about the overarching themes of the reading, but there's a few more things I think seem important to talk about with this one. So there's this whole idea that I keep talking about that seems like it's coming up again and again throughout the reading of like, we're already in this new reality, but at the same time with the aces in particular, and with the Ace of Pentacles as a synthesis, it's also very important for you to know that this is the initial stages of something new. Sometimes when I think about the aces, I think about them as containing the entire spectrum of possibility for what unfolds in the suit ahead. And with the aces, that possibility hasn't always yet taken a specific form. It's just sort of that possibility. So this feels like a really important card for us to have as a synthesis message for the entire reading, because I think it's letting us know, and I don't want this to sound like in a heavy way, but it does feel like it's a reminder to you that you have a responsibility to be an active participant in shaping this new reality as you go forward. So in our deck, we used an actual seed for the Ace of Pentacles. And so there's that whole metaphor of, obviously a seed needs to be tended to. It needs the right amount of light. It needs the right nutrients in the soil. So those are all really good metaphors for sort of asking yourself, where am I right now? What is taking shape? And how can I actively and intentionally do, I don't even know if work is the right word, but just sort of engage with that process and be not just one thing that feels really strong to me about the new reality is we're all really needing to be active participants in it. We have to be willing to do a lot of the things we talked about earlier in the reading, like commit even more strongly to what we know is true, that feels more prominent now, while also not holding that too tightly. And we need to really be here and be engaged in this process. It's not something that's a passive process. It's something that we are all doing together. And that feels really strong to me with this Ace of Pentacles, is just a reminder of we need to really be tending to this and take it seriously, not in terms of putting a lot of pressure on ourselves, but take it seriously in terms of knowing we're part of co-creating. We're part of co-creating with the universe, because there's also this whole thing with seeds where, yes, we as human beings can kind of help provide the right environment for a seed, but it's also kind of a magical thing, that a seed just has this inherent intelligence, this inherent spark and spirit within itself that leads it to kind of grow and evolve. So we have to tend to things, but we also have to be able to know when things are just going to unfold organically and in ways that have their own rhythm and their own intelligence. So how can we do both of those things, really be actively creating while also be always opening our senses to what is naturally unfolding, what naturally wants to come forward and needs to come forward? I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit of a paradox, but that feels really strong with this one. I think that really brings everything full circle back to some of those central questions we talked about when we began laying out the cards, of asking yourself, is this approach useful? Is this approach effective? Because there's still a lot of question marks ahead of us, a lot of potential. We're in the new reality, but we're barely in it. There is a lot of surprises and twists and turns, I'm sure, up ahead. So we need to just really be as present as we can for that process. So I hope there's something in here that gives you some things to think about, maybe some things that resonate. And like I said at the beginning, take what resonates, leave the rest behind. So that is what I have for you. Thank you again for being here. I'm wishing you all of the best. Lots of recalibration energy coming your way. So take care, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.